So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how I sort of think about lessons as they pertain to recitals. And I do think that performing is important. And once again, I'm going to just highlight the reasons I like recitals, and then we're going to talk about the downfall, though, to focusing too much on performance. So it builds confidence, it gives motivation for focus, and even in the performance arena itself, being able to hold your focus while people are staring at you is a skill itself. And I think that's part of the reason why you can almost equate 1 hour of practicing or, 1 hour of performance with like 100 hours of practice, because that focus, you don't realize how deeply you're focusing, how deeply you're present, because you have all these eyes on you and you have all this attention at that moment. And so you're digging in deeper to the music. And it's one of the reasons why many people, myself included, and I wouldn't say I'm a natural performer. Maybe I am, and I've just was raised in a way where my shyness and my fear and I have a very strong aversion to attention. So that's why I don't really feel like I'm a natural performer. But I do experience what many people talk about, where when I play, not always, but many times it's the best that I play. And I think it's that I'm able, you don't want to mess up. You're just uber motivated and you just do it. You do things that you in practice could mess up on, and there isn't like this negative consequence to it. It might be that it's the energy of the people around you and you're feeding off of that. It could be the adrenaline itself helps you to have superpowers. I don't know what it is, but I certainly will say that I have experienced that. It's just that for somebody like me and many of my students, we have to overcome the fear of getting on the stage. And then once we're on the stage, we get to experience this uber focus that comes into play. And it's really a joy. It's really a pleasure to get to feel that way. Not only that, but it's this wonderful release of endorphins after it's over. It's such a joy after you have expressed yourself in this way in front of people. It's truly a joy. So recitals are a safe place to do this. That's my favorite thing about them. It's safe. And this is I can't speak for every recital, but I can say how I've run them and how I've seen many other teachers that I have spoken of before, that there are a fleet of wonderful music teachers out there. And many times, the more I meet them, and I just met a bunch recently, we do a lot of the same things. And one of them is making sure that our students recognize this as a safe space to mess up, that we also teach them how to be an active listeners to each other, and also teach them how to be encouraging. And I think this is important because old school methods really used competition to motivate people. And for some students, this is great. I mean, I'm teaching a virtuoso student who absolutely loves competition, just thrives off of it. And so I don't want to take competition away from those students that works for, but it does not work for everyone. For me, it was a deterrent. Music never seemed like a competitive thing. It didn't seem like a race. It didn't seem like there should be a number one and a number two. So I was very turned off by that competitiveness. And it was very hard when I was in an environment and everything becomes about comparing yourself. For me, it would go the direction of just making me want to quit. And for many students, it's that way. It's like they, if they're not guided in a proper direction, they want to show up at recitals and just compare themselves to everybody. And how many of us do this? Music is a metaphor here. How many of us do this with everything, right? It's that competitive mindset that really many of us want to get past. Because it holds back the human spirit, in which competition and hierarchy and these things don't have a place, because there's infinite room for everyone. There's a place for everyone. There's a niche for everyone. And it's more about finding your unique niche and uplifting everybody around you through your uniqueness, rather than pushing others down so you can be on top, right? And so music, for me, a big part of coming to music as an adult was recognizing that competitiveness was what turned me off to music. I didn't want that to be part of it. So many of the recitals that I've done, I've been able to foster in these young students this idea of, we're doing a show. Each one of us is an integral part to this show. And that's how I would produce my recitals for many, many years. Would put them on as little shows. And I would, make it like each student's song contributed. And it didn't matter what their level was. And it really doesn't matter what their level was. It's the ability to bring their heart and their uniqueness and play their role, to step up and play their role. And that's all they have to do, right? And then they get to sit back and enjoy the rest of the show. And for the most part, the students that I worked with, they didn't struggle with competition when they were just introduced to a different way of thinking of it, that there was room for all of us and that we were all needed as part of this show. Now, granted, some students were more advanced than others. And in many cases, it was older versus the younger, but not always. And so in those instances, it was a great time to harbor or to foster humility, which is very, very important in music, because some of the absolute best musicians that I know are the humblest people. And they do recognize that there's room for everybody. And they're not trying to be me, number one. I'm it. Everybody pay attention to me. Although I will say there is a lot of that in music, but I would say those are not the best musicians. The best musicians that I have ever had the, fortune of being around personally, not just hearing their music from afar, but knowing them, the graciousness, the humility that they have. And I believe it's because their connection is, they've been able to connect this uber technique, this discipline, this excellence in the human form with their spirit, and their spirit comes from a place of absolute generosity. So many of the recitals that I had, that's the spirit that we had. And it was such a joy to produce little shows like this every year. It really was. I mean, I had mentioned that last week I had the fortune of photographing a full day of recitals. And part of me, because I've been out of the recital world for a few years, I really haven't had any recitals since COVID. And there's been a few online recitals that I've done, but especially in the last few years, I have not done any. And I forgot that purity, that joy that comes from children playing music, watching them get up there and just give their all. I mean, that's part of music, right? It's not just the technique. It's when you see somebody going up there and giving their all to a piece of music. And you can watch a 5-year-old do that with Old MacDonald and just be absolutely moved. You really can. And I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten the way that a child's music can wash over your soul like a waterfall and just help you to, feel renewed, help you have faith again in humanity. That's one of the wonderful things about children. And children's music is something in particular that is such a joy. So I encourage those in your community to support, children in the arts, to go out and hear the little shows they have, and to support the music that they're doing. It's not just a sacrifice like we can think in our heads, like, oh gosh, like it's gonna be so boring. I remember when I first wanted to become a music teacher, so I had some comments like, oh boy, that's gonna be real fun, right? Sitting all day being like, dee-nee-nee, dee-nee-nee, hearing that wrong note over and over and over again. And it gets on you, especially if you're like many music teachers where you're in a position where you're probably teaching too much, which I at one point in my career did do. Then yeah, that can be grating on you, but what job isn't? And there's this other side to it that they don't recognize, and that is the absolute joy and purity of children's music, no matter what they're playing. So maybe someday I'll get back to producing recitals, but I was reminded of that last week, and especially when I met another musician who absolutely had the joy of spirit, and he is a music educator who is out there doing incredible things, and he came from that same place. Like, his recitals were a show, He wanted those parents to be entertained, and they loved it. They enjoyed it from start to finish, and those students loved it. And when you produce it that way, it really takes the competition out of it, which I would say smash competition, because for music to really become what it needs to become, which is to not fall into this AI place of just all being technique driven, all just being about like competition and, oh, let's listen to him because he's so good. And this elitism idea, like, oh, nobody else should play music because he's just that good, right? Rather than come from that place, it's a place where we all have a voice and we all need to contribute to the symphony. And these recitals can help students to foster that from a young age. And most likely they will go and be involved with music in their communities. They will support others who are involved with music, and that competition will be taken out of them, especially the painful feeling that I know many musicians that feel where they can't even enjoy other people's music because it's so much about a competition in their own mind, and so much about a sense that they're not enough, that their own music is not enough. And for those adults that might be struggling with that, it's something very difficult. It's maybe these younger students, because of teachers that I've met and because of the way I taught, these younger students aren't as caught up in that. But I'll tell you, a lot of us older people, that was something that a message we were taught. And so when you come to music, it's one of the blocks you have to face. It's this idea that you have something to contribute, and it doesn't have to be compared to anybody else's. It shouldn't be. It should be so unique and so you that what's the point of comparing it? And if you don't do it, nobody else will, right? Whatever that is, whatever it looks like for you. So, that's smashing the competition with recitals. All right.